Live now.
Cool. Ow. Okay, hello and welcome to another Manchester Futurist live event on YouTube. I'm Georgia, I'm not muted for once, and I'm your host for this evening. So this month we're joined by Leanne Curlin, who's a senior researcher at BBC R&D in Manchester. Her research is focused on what people consider to be important and valuable in their lives, taking ideas such as connecting with others and exploring the world. Her research actually began as a look at digital well-being, but has quickly grown into developing a broader understanding of what human values are and why they're important. But before we hear about Leanne's research today, we've got a bit of admin, a few of our own human values, if you like, to address. We've some rules in our code of conduct, which you can see here. Essentially, the main rule is please be nice to each other and give our moderators in the comments section an easy job. So you can get us in touch with us on social media. We can be followed on Twitter and Facebook for updates on our next event. And we've now left Meetup and we're focusing our efforts on these platforms. So please give us lots of likes and follows to keep up with our activities on these platforms. You can also catch up with all our other videos on YouTube on this channel. We realise it's a pretty random link at the moment, but once we've got 500 subscribers, which won't be long, we can change it to our name. A good reason to hit the subscribe button below now. So over to you, Leanne.
Thank you, Georgia. Very nice introduction. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, just checking I've got the main view. Yep. Okay, hello everybody, I'm Leanne. I work at the BBC and I lead a project called Human Values. And I'm going to be talking about that this evening. So human values is a deeper conversation about people, their values, and the digital media environment. Let's start at the beginning. A few years ago, we started to notice some very unhealthy trends when it came to digital consumption. For example, let's take these three figures. 150 is the amount of times the average adult picks up their phone in a day. 226 is the amount of minutes the average adult spends on their phone every day, and 450 is the amount of minutes that the average teenager spends on their phone in a day. And these numbers are even before the pandemic, so I imagine they're much more heightened now. Not only that, we saw lots of reports about people feeling anxiety at being separated from their devices, feeling overwhelmed, and in some cases, even addicted to their devices. Recognizing this, we asked ourselves, how might we deliver digital services that are more aligned with our human values? Firstly, I want to zoom out a little bit and talk about digital technology and how our behavior has changed. In the last decade or so, more and more of our lives have gone digital. With changes to online comes changes to our behavior, from how we communicate, how we work, shop, and so on. And we've never really seen this more prominent than we have during the last year. where digital has become our lifeline for preserving aspects of our offline lives in the online space. You'll agree with me that the online digital space enables so many fantastic things, such as the opportunity to connect, to learn, to relax. But I'm sure you'll also agree that on the flip side, it can make us feel isolated rather than connected, overwhelmed at information overload in attempts to learn, and perhaps in negative states of anxiety and emotional trauma, the exact opposite of feeling relaxed and peaceful. Technology in this regard can be created, designed, and served to us in a way that helps or hinders us. At the beginning of this work, we were really interested in digital well-being, specifically hindrances to well-being through use of digital services, why negative effects occur, and any mitigations that we could put in place. This progressed into taking a step back to understand more about people, their values, how these might have changed with the introduction of digital services, and how services are moving people towards or away from their values. In doing this research, we uncovered more about the unethical sides of technology. We all know that time spent does not equal time well spent for the consumer, but it does to the business because it becomes ingrained in their business model. Now, this is a very overly simplistic model, but what I've outlined here and what I really want to get across is how time spent and attention injects into the process through design and measurement of digital services. And what do I mean by time spent? Well, engagement, consumption, duration, and essentially your attention is what we call a proxy, which is something that has been determined as an indirect measure of success. It's not wrong to measure attention. It shows that the product or the service is good. If people use it, it must be needed. But these types of measure have their shortcomings because they don't provide that full picture and sometimes ignore larger things at play. In the same way that BMI doesn't tell you a rich picture about somebody's overall health, ignoring muscle mass, bone density, or in the same way that GDP doesn't tell you this rich picture about the happiness of a nation, access to education, or the effects that we're having on the environment, all important factors that demonstrate the value of a nation. So why do we even bother measuring time spent? Well, a large amount of services rely on advertising revenue, especially the free ones. Think free, and we all know that there's no such thing as free. Reading between the lines, free means that you are the product, your data, your time, your attention. And so your attention becomes their profit, whereby the business goal is to increase attention and time that you spend with your device. This in turn increases ad revenue and ultimately revenue. In competing for your time spent and your attention, companies then start to design in ways to maximize for your attention and for your time. And this cycle just continues. I've seen this play out in business, but these are the main three areas that I see. So in key performance indicators, where this is number of users, time spent, engagement, all those metrics I've just talked about, these are the things that we see product people on the ground aiming for. We see it through innovation, where companies start looking to others that have a larger share of attention and consumer base, which results in companies just copying each other. So this is why you'll probably see that a lot of products that you use very similar methods. They might even look alike, barring a few word changes here and there. And in doing this, it really constrains design efforts and innovation within those companies. And then through design, here we're going into the land of dark user experience, where design is created especially to just grab your attention, to evoke your emotions, and to create unhealthy habits. And what is dark UX? So what I will say is check out this website, darkpatterns.org. It gives you all the lowdown on what I'm talking about here. So how do they do it? They basically tap into your psychology, and it's the basis of behavioral psychology. The techniques that are used in the gambling industry to make you feel hooked, to make you engage with the product and keep returning. These are filtered through in the design of digital services. That slot machine that you use, where the variable rewards, you pull the lever, you don't know if you get a reward, it makes you keep coming back. It's the same way that notifications work. They're drip fed to you, so you keep returning. And some dark patterns, such as it might be really easy to sign up to a service in one click, but it might take you 10 to be able to unsubscribe. And here's just an example. Notice how you always have new content on your feed. That's not a coincidence. It's not always new content. A lot of the time it's just repurposed so that it looks like you've always got new things to catch up on. In thinking, how does this affect the end consumer? We have seen unintended consequences because human attention is fine for validation, for their likes and their follows and all of that. And we see this most often in young people. And it's interesting that companies are concerned about their market shares, but are they really concerned about well-being, especially when they're just using these dark UX patterns? You might have seen the Social Dilemma film, which highlights a lot of these effects. If you haven't, go watch it. But here's a very short recap. I think these are really like the three key areas. So on brain health, it's that it affects our ability to concentrate, to focus. It affects our sleep. It affects mental well-being, such as depression, anxiety, negative comparisons to other people. On social well-being, we start seeing effects in isolation. And then on children's development, we see compromises on language and literacy. And then zooming out to an even bigger scale, to society and culture, we see a rise of fake news. We see people being sent into filter bubbles, where the more you click on something, the more you're likely to see more of that content, because the algorithm has detected what you like and it just wants to keep you there, so it will give you more of that. And this starts to confirm some biases that we have, and whether we understand these biases or not, whether they're conscious or unconscious biases. We're more likely to, in psychology, we know that we're more likely to believe something if we keep seeing it, which is why you might see things like flat earth, anti-vax, all those types of things. It's no coincidence, it's just an algorithm. It's serving up more of the things that you click on, which in turn gets your attention. And we see a rise of polarized group and hate speech. So going back to my earlier point, time spent does not mean time well spent for the consumer. We believe that design and measurement does not have to be business need only, because we've seen that when human values are disregarded, those attempts to serve the business come at the cost of the individual. And surely it doesn't have to be business versus human. Surely there's a more sustainable path. Because if we could find something to focus on instead, something to design for and measure for, surely we can inject human values into this cycle. So going back to my opening points, we looked at values in a digital world because we see the rise in internet has afforded more content, options, and freedom over consumption, time and place. This results in easier access, more choice, busier lifestyles, and we observe these rapid changes in behavior, but we know that behavior is very adaptable. And we've seen this over the last year of living in the pandemic. Specifically, we wanted to understand human values in a digital world. Before I move on to talk about this, I'm going to just define value here, because there's lots of different definitions, and the way in which we look at it is from the psychological level. So I've talked about behavior, which is that observable and measurable trait, the things that we see And if we take this iceberg analogy, it's above the surface, the things that we see in people. In this same analogy, human needs sit right at the bottom, which are really deep-seated, they're implicit and opposed to our behavior, which is really outwards and explicit. Largely speaking, behaviors change a lot, needs don't really change. Those core needs to be alive, be part of a group, contribute to the welfare of others, they do evolve, but very, very steadily over time. Whereas behavior does change, it changes in relation to time, place, context, but behaviors will always largely serve our deeper needs. There are some circumstances where behavior doesn't and it's misaligned. So we want to understand what sits in the middle, what is the sort of go-between, the interplay between the two. And this is where human values comes in, which a value in this psychological sense is more fluid than behavior, but it's less changeable than behavior, and more fluid than our needs. And this is where you really start to understand what people place importance on, what they prioritize in their lives, and so on. Values are manifest through behavior while serving those deeper needs. Our research has taken shape over the last 3 years, understanding our audience, understanding what's truly important to them in their lives. We distilled this down to a set of 14 values that are a priority for our audience. We created a design framework and templated measure a way in which we can measure human values. Now, this is the full set of human values. They're supported by research and they have those psychological needs that sit underneath them. And just like in the analogy situation I spoke about earlier. So to give you an example, a value of achieving goals represents the underlying need to demonstrate a competency in our lives. A value of exploring the world is informed by a need to understand more about the environment that we find ourselves in. And a value of receiving recognition fulfills really important self-esteem needs. You might resonate with some of them, you might not resonate with some of them, but this is because certain values are at the forefront of our lives at different times. We value for different things in different quantities, depending on where we are in our lives, what's going on, and who we're doing things with. And in this respect, values are fluid because they change at different points. We found that this especially true with our younger audience. At these points in life, we found quite general patterns of certain values becoming more important than others. Some of our general patterns indicate that those at school value belonging and understanding oneself because their identity needs are really important through those teenage years, and the peer group is really important. Whilst when someone is becoming a parent, they value things like connecting with others, especially other parents, having that support group, having stability, and having autonomy. Values also change according to what's going on in the world around us, because we don't live in a vacuum. Culturally speaking, we find different sorts of patterns. So collectivist cultures value belonging, having impact, those very group-based values, whilst more Western and individualistic cultures value connecting with others, achieving goals, and those really individually led values. Environmentally and situationally, things happen like the pandemic, where the time has intrinsically made us stop and think about things and reassess what's fundamentally important. And we see the shift to digital life. So being safe is put above everything right now. Connecting with others is very important to a large amount of us because it's been somewhat compromised. Values in this regard are a way to understand people in more rich and meaningful ways. The insights that we have been transformed into a framework for design practice so that it isn't merely a tick box exercise. It doesn't come after the creative and the discovery processes. Human values are put up front and center, considering who the audience is, what's important to them, in combination with an intention for the idea. If it's going away from being solution-led, technology-led, to being values-led in combination with business goal. The toolkit that we developed comprises of different elements. We have value cards, which help designers, creators, innovators to understand audiences, audience priorities, understand they can be used just by all of us to understand our own priorities, and we can start ideating based on human values. They have some standard design practice methods that we include, which resonate with designers, such as how might we questions. It's a very standard design practice. We also have value mapping canvas, which considers the who, what, where, why, how. Those are really important questions that sometimes, and unfortunately, do get overlooked in the quest for sort of gaining more audience. And then we have these ethical sort of kit, more sort of cards that we developed, because we know human values are very vulnerable. We know that they're susceptible to being exploited. Again, I'm going to refer to the Social Dilemma film. Go watch it. Our ethical kit helps people to use it to develop empathy and to understand what those human values feel like, so that we avoid exploiting people's values. And then coming to the measurement side of things, we believe that measuring human value is going to provide that richer picture than purely just measuring attention, engagement, time spent. We know tech is dominated by attention metrics, the reach, consumption, time spent, and then this is all done to increase their users, increase the time spent, that circle and that cycle I talked about, which unfortunately drives innovation. It drives business decisions, and it can lead to unethical practices. So we built a framework for measurement. It's based on psychometrics, which is standard practice in psychology, which aims to measure social constructs or concepts that are sometimes quite hard to grasp. We can measure the underlying psychology of each value to have this rich picture about the extent to which a digital service or a product is helping a person fulfill their values, moving people towards, not away from their values. The measurement framework that we've created is intended to help inform decisions. It's intended to help make improvements to services and to understand areas for greater effort. It can complement consumption metrics to provide that richer understanding, to put the color around the numbers, put the bigger picture around that sort of one number. And that way we go from being solely driven by reach and consumption to respecting human values, where this fight for attention amongst companies might mean that we're better able to respect the vulnerabilities that we have. And then that design that really exploits emotion might mean that we can move to a more sort of design for value added, with the hopes that all of the constrained innovation that designers are faced with, it becomes much more open, which is also more fulfilling for those designers in the creative process and to fulfill their human values. Going back to this opening point, we looked at values in the digital world, because if we can find something to design for and measure for, surely we can inject value into the cycle. So what are we working on right now? We're currently testing our psychometrics by measuring different services. We're doing this internally within the BBC, and this is R&D, so this is experimentation. But on the design side of things, we are currently working on a project where we're bringing human values to the design practice in our project that got funded by Nesta, which is part of the next generation of the internet. And the funding is around really trying to optimize the internet for human values. So it starts with this intention. So we ask all these questions, like what if we innovated using human values? And what if we enabled ethical agency through design? And then into the measures, what if we started measuring these human values and understanding what the content, what the service or the product is actually doing for somebody. So we're currently working on this right now, and I'm going to wrap up in a second. So I just want to say that we really have this opportunity to have digital life to be more valued. And I think the big challenge is to really take a step back and really rethink what success looks like. And I think it needs to happen on a bigger scale. So I just want to say thank you. I've been Leanne Curlin, and here are some links where you can find some of our work. The toolkit is all open source, so anybody can use it. We actually really urge people to use it, and we always want to collaborate with people externally. So if this is something that resonates with you, something that you could make use of, please do get in touch. And just want to say thank you. And thank you to the Futurists for hosting me this evening. And I'm going to stop there and say, yeah, any questions?
I think, is my camera on now? Can you see me? I'm here. Cool, great, thank you. That was really interesting. There I am. So, for those of you who are watching, if you've got any questions, just put them in the chat. But Ian, did you have a question that you wanted to kick off with?
I've got quite a few questions.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's do the first one. So, you ended with it being open sourced. Can you just kind of like share your rationale behind why you want to open source it, and what you foresee coming from that? Because, for example, I can imagine, a company like, another company could then take that and go, we've got this, it's our proprietary thing, and we're going to sell it to different organizations for them to buy into what we're sort of things that we're learning. So wondering why open source it?
So mainly because we're public service, everything we do is kind of open source. We want to collaborate with the creative industry. We want to collaborate more with others. We're not in the business of making money on this. We want to work externally because we believe it just propels this sort of work a lot further. Like, more people that work on it, the more it should become standard practice, and it just enables. We just want to change like the whole industry, not just the BBC, but the whole creative industry, the whole digital kind of services and all the economy around that. And I think we are working with external people. We have given a lot of our tools and our psychometric inventory to people to use, and it only improves what we do, because we then get feedback on how other people have used it, and it then just creates more and more. It just expands more.
Could you give some examples of the people who've used your toolkit?
Yeah, I think I can. Ian, can I?
I think you can mention maybe the because be pretty clear that we kind of work together. So
yes.
Yeah. So I guess we can mention like maybe the areas that they're working in rather than the company names.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that actually makes more sense. Yeah. So some of the companies work with like other user experience type of industries that provide like user experience services for media. In not just, we're working with quite a lot of European companies, other broadcasters. Yeah, so they're kind of the main ones. A lot of other people working in those sorts of fields.
Cool, thank you. Next question, let's see. So surely this is a user choice. So if a user wouldn't like a service or, a product, they just stop using it. Like, why is it on the people who are designing them? I know I'm just like being devil's advocate here. But
really great question. Yeah, I like it. So yes, on some extent, if you don't like a product, you have that, you can stop using it. But I think a lot of the sort of tech, the big tech platforms, unfortunately, there aren't really any other options for people to use other types of those services. I mean, I don't want to name them. I'm sure you can sort of gather the ones I'm alluding to, but when there's no other alternative platforms for people to use and all their friends are on there, and it makes it very difficult, because it's like we do what our peers do, and we don't want to be left out. And a lot of the time I talked about human values being like quite vulnerable to being exploited, and this is exactly where I kind of mean. So a lot of the platforms, they almost perpetuate this cycle where people need to be validated, so that they are using certain platforms for that reason, and then it becomes this cycle. It perpetuates all of the problem. And I think because there are certain tech platforms that are sort of big hitters, and it just, that sort of fear of missing out, the sort of human value of belonging is being exploited by the sort of fear of missing out and not being part of it. And when you're not part of it, you feel excluded. So you kind of, it's like almost like peer group pressure in a sense.
Yeah. So what then do you think is the worst case scenario if we didn't adopt these sort of human values into services and the products that we use?
I think I don't know if you've seen the Social Dilemma film, but I think that just, we are in this kind of world where there's loads of unhealthy adoption around technology. There's so much unhealthy behaviors. Some of the research that we did prior to the human values really highlighted that, and it showed that people, like a lot of the way that they use technology right now is exploiting their need to feel validated, the need for self-esteem. And the Social Dilemma just really highlights that really well. So I think the worst case is we're kind of in that sort of scenario right now. I think what we're trying to do is almost free up design effort to be more innovative and deliver services that are really meaningful for people, that are not just going to be there to kind of exploit some of their needs. So I think we're kind of in that space. But so we just want to create a new, move people like into a more kind of valued space.
Yeah, and like you've spoken a lot about, like, obviously the pandemic's changed the way in which we, use technology and things. Do you think that that's the past year has sort of accelerated the, people's understanding that we need to have this sort of, these values within what we do and things? Do you think it's accelerated that acceptance that we need to change something?
I think so. So obviously we started this work 3 to 4 years ago, maybe even longer ago. And there wasn't really an appetite for it. Whereas over the last year, we have seen that people have realized that, okay, technology is great on one hand. It's enabled us to stay connected to our friends and family. It's helped us learn. It's helped us relax, all those types of things. But actually, too much of it is just too much. And we have Zoom fatigue. That's a real thing. We have people feeling that they're just overwhelmed, and people, even you read all these things about people like waking up in the night using their phones and things like that. That's really unhealthy. So I do think the last year, like, our health and well-being has been put up front and center, which has almost increased appetite for this type of work, to realize, actually, going forward, what do we want to change in life? I think we've done that on so many different levels. I think personally, people have thought how they want to live post-pandemic, and what behaviors they want to bring that they're doing now into that they weren't doing before the pandemic into post-pandemic world. But I think it's happened on a grander scale too. So organizations looking around ethical use of technology and all those other things, and the environment, everything. I think there's just so much appetite for change now.
Do you think then that businesses are sort of, going to place ethics a lot higher than they would have done previously because of sort of that shift to, now everything is online? Do you think it's sort of increased, like the priority for it has sort of been pushed up a level as opposed to before?
Yeah, I do think so. I think the appetite for ethics has grown huge in the last year. I think so.
Do you know of any businesses and sort of like that have actually done that and said, right, we really need to think about the way in which we do things, and they've sort of, made that transparent in their practices? Like, it's a difficult question.
Yeah, there's organisations that I know do really good ethics already. People like that we've spoken with in the past, like Mozilla, they're a good organisation that take into account ethics as well as business needs. Even like Patagonia, they're a really great example of an organisation. I can't think of anything more off the top of my head, but
No, Patagonia is a really good example of how they sort of, those values, they translate them into their products as well. It's not just about like the marketing aspect of how they do things. It's like actually embedded within the rest of the service and the rest of the products for sort of manufacturing and things. Ian, you've turned your camera back on. Does that mean you've got some thoughts?
I was just going to ask a follow-on question. Following the pandemic, another thing that obviously has happened is the murder of George Floyd, and kind of a lot of things, for example, with Sarah Everett, and stuff like that. Do you think that companies will start to? Do you think that this might edge companies towards a much more kind of a human value approach, or do you think that it's kind of like not that you from your professional opinion that it might not be enough to kind of make them really make the jump? Maybe it's all about the money, for example.
Firstly, I think it depends which companies we're talking about, because I think there's quite a few different factors at play. So large organizations often are in a better position to be more sustainable, to be more ethical, to embed these types of principles in their practice, where we've got like small organizations, when they're having to just show that they can exist in the world, they are more reliant on more kind of aggressive kind of financial values. So I think that that's a factor at play. But I think all these types of, all the kind of movements that you're talking about, and all the unfortunate events that have happened, I think they make people stop and think. And I think that happening now in a pandemic, when people's lives are like a lot not as busy as they were before, so they're a lot slower, people are naturally more sort of tuned into what's going on in the world in those regards. I think it gives more appetite for these things, for more kind of human value led sustainable approaches, I think. If that answers your question.
I think I guess I was kind of thinking that there's kind of a trend going towards this because of some of the protests and stuff like that, but also people are starting to realize that that the technology, stuff like the Social Dilemma and others are kind of like making very clear that there is a problem, and people are starting to realize that actually it's they felt bad and now they feel worse, and they're starting to. So I know that there's been a bit of a push towards remove yourself from popular social network, stuff like that. So I was wondering if that might be kind of adding to this whole kind of like, actually let's adopt a more human focus, and will companies kind of understand that and kind of follow that, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, like with all the protests happening, even just like this past weekend, yeah, I agree. I was going to ask for your thoughts on it because I know you'd have some good thoughts.
Thank you. Should we do another question, Georgia?
Yeah. So Caroline asks that, well, she says that central government is pushing for social values to be included in the structure of the company. Can these human values be used to drive social value within organisations?
Oh, yeah, good question. So actually, one of the things that we're doing is we're looking at things like developing measures of things like inclusion. So to complement things like diversity and inclusion. So where you've got diversity stats and targets, you've got like this extra layer of understanding how included people feel within an organization. So that would be one approach. Yeah, I think anything that really respects people, respects like what it means to be human and what we need in life and all those types of things will ultimately enable businesses to just to be truly human centered. I think a lot I was like listening to a really good podcast that was saying that a lot of organizations say that they're human centered and they're actually not. They don't really understand people in any sort of deep way beyond a few kind of demographic factors. So I think human values is a way in which it's a lens to understand people in more deeper ways. So I think any sort of approach you take to understand people more will always lead to better social outcomes. And that can be within the organization, outside of the organization, for the consumer, all those types of things.
Yeah, you really are putting the human back into human-centered design, aren't you? with the work that you're doing. It's like just, different ways of thinking through how do we put the person who is, sort of in the middle of all this first. And I think that's really interesting. So we've mentioned the social dilemma a lot. Are there any other sort of books or films or anything that you would, recommend to people who sort of want to learn more, or any just resources that are out there?
I wrote a booklet. You can read that. A bit of self-promotion there. No, but I think just very, very kind of similar in the similar spaces. In the similar space, I think the things like there's the Donut Economics, I think is a really good book to read. The Value of Everything. I'm going to give like a shout out to Yancey Strickler, who does this Bento Society, which is like looking at better decision making for the future, and someone that we've collaborated with. The Centre for Humane Tech, who I've also worked with, also are looking at making things more human-centered. So I think Ian might have some recommendations as well, because he is always much more kind of attuned to all the new things going on. I'm putting you on the spot there.
Oh, thank you very much. I think there's a number of documentaries, and now you put me on the spot. I can't think of the names, but there's one which is called The Great Hack, which may not seem like it's connected, but it shows it's about what happens when these dark patterns, these are the natural consequence of these dark patterns. So that's well worth looking at and watching. And there's another one which I cannot remember right now, which is about misinformation. That's really good as well. And then book-wise, I think you've probably mentioned most of them. I mean, I would also, and I think this is a question for you as well, Leanne, is that a lot of these things are, when you look at them, you can look at them very surface level, But the thing that's interesting about all of this is that we're starting to get into psychology. We're getting into the depths of psychology. And so, for example, a book that I would highly recommend is The Inner Level, which is all about inequality. And so I think that there's probably some stuff that's much more, I know that you've obviously studied psychology. Is there some books out of there which kind of help people to understand where some of these dark patterns are coming from, for example? So, the gambling industry, where, what are the books that are kind of like, what are the things that are feeding that? What's the underlying principles behind that? I guess are interesting to our watchers.
Yeah, I think, that's a really good point, that a lot of that psychology is really interesting. I think, so just to give you a quick 101, there's like so basically the whole of Silicon Valley, a lot of all the big tech companies, the people that kind of worked on them all came from the same university, and it was basically a university that taught how to make products like really addictive. It's I can't remember somewhere in is it San Francisco or somewhere, that they kind of all went to this same, basically to learn how to make products really addictive. And it's all, the underlying premise is all about kind of gambling industry and behavioral psychology. And it's all, a lot of it is around creating habits. So there's BJ Fogg is an author to read, who talks about how you can basically make the environment more likely for people to get addicted, and not necessarily addicted, but for habits to stick. So then that translated into the tech. There's not really, I think it's not really books that I'd recommend. It's probably papers. And so when I did a lot of this research, I wrote it up as a white paper, and there's lots of references in there. So I don't have them to hand. I don't know them off the top of my head. There's over 160 of them, but I can give you that link to go and read them, because that's really interesting. I think also, without having to understand the underlying psychology, I think the darkux.org, is it darkpatterns.org, is really, really good. It shows you all the different types of techniques that are used, that I talked about very briefly. So I think just understanding what techniques they use, because they're all based on like the idea of hook, trigger, reward, which is classic psychology. You give somebody a hook to get in, you trigger them, and then you reward them, and then that's how the behavior continues. And that's basically all of how the tech has used all of the gambling industry techniques.
I was going to say that the one I was thinking about is one called After Truth. Disinformation and the Cost of Fake News is a documentary, and stuff like Barry Schwartz, who wrote the book The Paradox of Choice. It's stuff like that I think will start to, when these are the underlying principles. And I can't remember that university as well they all kind of went to. I'm sure I think it's in the Social Dilemma, isn't it?
I think it
yeah So I think that those are probably the ones to have a look at if you're really interested in more.
I think that people should just be aware of some of the techniques, even things like forced continue, like being forced to continue, the endless bottomless pit of the scroll, like it will never stop. They're just a few techniques, or shaming choices. So you'll get ads that saying, do you really want to leave? Like all those types of things. And even just why I think there's loads of evidence. There's loads of evidence on the Dark Patterns website. There's like a hall of shame, and loads of people can. It's just like anyone can submit something they've seen, and it's things like even when you go and book a flight or a hotel room and you get that, oh, there's only one left at this price. That's completely wrong. It's just basically forcing you to, giving you that bit of anxiety to think, oh gosh, I need to book this right now, when there probably wasn't one last. Yeah, so it's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had one more question.
Okay.
So we talked a little bit, but we didn't quite get into it, about the kind of bottom line for businesses. And I know in the interviews that we did as a podcast, funny enough, we talked about a kind of double bottom line. Did you want to explain a little bit about that, or what that could mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did. So for those who are not aware, Ian and I, we work together, and we also have done some podcasts about this topic where we interviewed lots of really great people who do some really great stuff in this space. And we talked quite a lot about this idea of a double bottom line, where you've got the business line and you've got like a social line as well. So it's actually, what are you doing in addition to making money? So it could be that you might be taking less money, but you're actually giving people more agency over the data on the website. It could be that you're, I think someone like Patagonia, you're actually doing good, you're putting back into the environment, those types of things. So it's the idea that you could take the business sort of bottom line with a social bottom line, and put other factors into your kind of business model. Yeah.
Thank you. That's excellent.
That is, yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you. That was really insightful. I keep thinking how it's funny that the social dilemma, the documentary that we reference as a great entry point into this, is on a platform which is known for sort of spending more time scrolling through what you actually want to watch than watching something. But like you said, hopefully sort of the awareness of these dark patterns and more companies sort of upholding human values that you've been talking about will make people a lot more aware of these things in the future, and not just that awareness, but also not have to, the dark patterns won't exist, and services and products will be a lot more sort of tuned to the fact of what people actually need and what they want. So yeah, it's been really insightful. Thank you. And we'll put all the links and stuff that you mentioned up on the blog. And so for those of you who are watching, you can join us again next month for the Future of Diversity and Inclusion with Dr. Jonathan Ashong-Langty from the Element of Inclusion podcast. And yeah, thank you again to Leanne. That was really, really good fun. Well, is it good fun to be thinking about horrible things, but what the work you've been doing, there's light at the end of the tunnel. And yeah, so it was really insightful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been
anytime. Cool. Thank you. Right. And thanks to you at home for watching. So we'll see you next time.